This book is kind of like, it's like a guidebook for anyone who's ever felt stuck because they were too worried about what other people would think, you know?
Hmm.
And it's full of these amazing stories, too, from people who, like, faced those fears and actually came out on top. Olympian CEOs, all sorts.
And they really get into the nitty-gritty with, like, real-life examples. Like, imagine being Lauren Regula, this Olympic athlete, and she's thinking about making a comeback after 11 years.
Right. And it wasn't even the physical part that almost stopped her. It was the worry that people would judge her for wanting to go for this dream at 39 and leaving her family behind.
Mhm.
I mean, how many of us can relate to that feeling, that fear holding us back, even in just everyday stuff?
It's so true. And what I found really interesting was how they connect these everyday struggles to what's actually happening in our brains, like this whole concept of Leary's sociometer,
Yeah.
and how we're basically hardwired to want to belong. It makes sense, right? Like back in the day, being part of the tribe was important for survival, but now,
Now it's like that wiring is going haywire. We're constantly bombarded with chances to compare ourselves.
yeah.
On social media, at work, even just walking down the street.
Mhm.
So it's no wonder everyone's feeling this fear of judgment so strongly.
It's like our brains haven't caught up to the fact that, like, a weird look from our boss isn't the same as being chased by a lion or something, you know?
Exactly, but our body sometimes
Well,
reacts
just-
like it
yeah.
is. And the book breaks down that reaction into these 3 phases: anticipation, responding, and then recovering. So first you're dreading the judgment,
Mhm.
then you're in it, overthinking every little thing, and then after you're replaying it all in your head.
Mm.
Oh, it's exhausting.
Totally. And they actually suggest this really interesting exercise to help you become more aware of those phases. It's like wearing a totally embarrassing outfit on purpose.
Right. It's like a way to purposely trigger those FOPO phases and really pay attention to how they feel in real time. Like the anticipation of getting dressed, the self-consciousness when you're out, and then that post-interaction analysis.
It really makes you realize how much mental energy we waste on this stuff.
Speaking of mental energy, the book also goes into how this fear of judgment can really mess with people who seem like they're immune to pressure, like professional athletes.
Yeah.
There's this example of a pro golfer, someone who performs under pressure all the time. But he totally choked during the simple putting challenge just because it's being filmed.
Oh, wow. So even the pros feel it. Why, though? What was happening there?
Well, he'd so closely tied his identity to being the expert that this fear of not living up to that image, even for a silly challenge, totally threw him off. It triggered that primal fight or flight response.
Mhm.
But instead of fighting or fleeing, he just froze.
And it's not just athletes. This whole idea of tying your self-worth to what other people think is bound to backfire. The book talks about how Olympic swimmer Missy Franklin struggled with this, even though her parents had always tried to help her see her worth beyond her achievements.
And what's heartbreaking is that she achieved incredible things. But because her self-worth was so intertwined with her performance, she really struggled when she didn't meet those sky-high expectations she'd set for herself.
It's a good reminder for all of us, but especially for young people who find success early on to define themselves beyond just what they achieve.
It's like we're trying to build these amazing lives, but on this foundation of sand, you know? If we're only relying on what other people think for our sense of self-worth.
Totally. And the thing is, it's not even like we're getting accurate feedback half the time. This whole spotlight effect thing really got to me.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We've all been there, feeling like everyone's watching our every move, just waiting for us to mess up. But the book reminds us that most of the time, that's just not true.
Yeah, they talk about this study where they had college students wear a Barry Manilow t-shirt. Can you believe that? And these students were convinced that everyone noticed, but it turned out not so much.
Exactly. Our brains like to make us the main character in every situation, you know? Like we're the stars of our own movie, so everyone must be paying attention to us. It's kind of funny when you think about it.
Right. So if we're always worried about this imaginary audience, no wonder it's hard to relax and just be ourselves. But what about those times when the pressure is really on, when it's not just in our heads?
Well, the book suggests shifting your focus. Instead of trying to pretend the pressure isn't there, which never really works, we should concentrate on the things we can control. Our prep, our mindset, even our self-talk. It's like shining that spotlight inward, focusing on our strengths.
I love that. So it's not about ignoring the pressure. It's about choosing where you focus your energy.
Exactly. And speaking of misplaced focus, let's talk about mind reading. That thing we all do, where we try to figure out what everyone else is thinking, especially after a not-so-great interaction.
Oh my gosh, tell me about it. I can overthink a 5-second conversation for hours, coming up with all these scenarios in my head.
Right. The book tells this really funny story about an MMA fighter and his team in Vegas. They'd planned this whole elaborate walk to the cage, but the coaches accidentally walked in front of the cameras at the last minute. Afterwards, the author, who was part of the team, was sure the fighter was going to be furious.
Oh no. Did he, like, lose it?
Nope, not even a little. He was so focused on the fight that he hadn't even noticed. The author had basically created this whole drama in his head that had nothing to do with reality.
It's so true, though. We're often our own worst critics, projecting our own insecurities onto other people.
Absolutely. And that ties into this idea of how our brains see the world through the lens of our own experiences and beliefs. The book uses this example of that dress that went viral a few years ago, remember? The one that people saw as either blue and black or white and gold.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. It was crazy. Same dress, but everyone was seeing completely different colors.
And it's the same with how we interpret people's opinions. Our brains use our existing beliefs to filter information. So if we're already insecure about something, we're more likely to zero in on any criticism, even if there's tons of positive feedback.
So we're basically setting ourselves up for failure with our own negativity.
In a way, yeah. But the book suggests a really helpful trick for dealing with those negative beliefs.
What?
They say we need to separate the belief from the opinion that caused it.
Okay, so say you totally bomb a presentation at work, and now you're convinced that your boss is disappointed in you.
Right. Instead of spiraling out of control, you'd start by examining the belief itself. My boss is disappointed in me. Then you'd look for actual evidence. Did your boss say something specific? Or are you just interpreting their body language through your own insecurities?
I see. Because a lot of times there's a big difference between what we think is happening and what's actually true.
Exactly. And by breaking it down like that, you can start to see things more clearly and challenge those negative thoughts that fuel your FOA.
So instead of letting fear run the show, we can approach these situations with more of a curious and open mind.
Exactly. Now, shifting gears a little, the book also questions this whole Western idea of the separate self, like how this emphasis on individualism might actually be making our FOPO worse.
That's interesting. You'd think being more independent would mean caring less about what other people think, wouldn't you?
You would. But the book makes the case that by constantly focusing on me, we're forgetting that we're actually wired for connection. Humans need community. We're not meant to go through life alone.
It's like that saying, no man is an island.
Exactly. We're all connected. And by tapping into that connection, whether it's volunteering, joining a group, or even just spending time in nature, we start to look outward instead of inward.
So instead of it being me versus them, it becomes we.
Yes. And that sense of belonging, of being a part of something bigger than yourself, that can be really powerful in silencing those fears and doubts.
It's like the more connected we feel, the less we need that outside validation and the less power a FOPO has over us.
Exactly. And this leads to one of the most powerful, but maybe kind of scary parts of the book, facing our own mortality.
Oh, okay. Getting deep here, but also kind of fascinating.
Definitely not a light topic. But the book presents it in a way that makes you think. It talks about this woman, Bronnie Ware. She cared for people in the final weeks of their lives.
And what she learned from those conversations.
Their biggest regret was not living a life true to themselves. They wished they hadn't let the fear of what other people thought control their choices.
Oh, wow. That's both heartbreaking and eye-opening. Like, if we're always putting our dreams on hold because we're worried about what others might think, are we really living the life we want?
The book talks about Steve Jobs' famous Stanford commencement speech, where he said, "Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose."
It's about realizing that life is short and we shouldn't waste it trying to please everyone else.
Right. Now, I know this can feel kind of heavy, but the book isn't about being morbid or dwelling on death. It's about using that awareness to motivate us to live more intentionally.
So instead of asking ourselves, what will people think? We should be asking, what do I regret right now? What changes can I make today to live more in line with my values?
Exactly. It's about shifting our focus from outside validation to inner fulfillment.
And a big part of that is being more careful about whose opinions we actually care about. Right.
Yes. It's not about ignoring everyone's feedback, but more about creating a system to filter out the noise. The book gives this example of a former NFL player. He had this strategy he called the screen.
The screen? Tell me more.
So this player, Nate Hopgood-Chittick, would only pay attention to feedback that was actually helpful and fit with his goals. Anything else like negativity or personal attacks, he just let it pass through his screen.
I like that. Like a mental shield to block negativity.
Exactly. And that's something we can all benefit from. When we're facing criticism, we can ask ourselves, is this person someone I trust? Is their feedback helpful and relevant to my goals?
And if not, let it go. Don't give it any space in your mind.
And even if it's from someone we do respect, It's still just their opinion. It's not necessarily true. We get to choose how much weight we give it.
That's really empowering. We have more control than we think we do.
Absolutely. And that brings us to one of the most important takeaways in this book, the power of a learner's mindset.
So instead of seeing feedback as a threat, we can choose to see it as a chance to grow.
Exactly. It's about changing that inner voice from, am I good enough, to how can I improve?
Because even when we make mistakes, and let's face it, we all do, there's always a lesson to be learned.
And that learning process, that's what leads to mastery. Not just in our careers or creative passions, but in mastering our own minds and overcoming those fears that try to hold us back.
So it's not about never feeling that fear of judgment. It's about choosing how we react to it.
Right.
Like, we can either let it stop us in our tracks, or we can use it to learn and grow.
Exactly. And this book gives you the tools to actually do that. It encourages you to question even those beliefs that feel like a core part of who you are.
Yeah, that can be scary. It's like those beliefs are the foundation of our whole world.
They are. But sometimes those beliefs, even the ones that used to help us, can actually hold us back from growing. The book uses some really cool brain science stuff to explain this.
Brain science and beliefs. Okay, now I'm really interested. Tell me more.
So they talk about this study where they scanned people's brains while they were looking at information that challenged their political views. Talk about a recipe for an argument. But here's the thing. The part of the brain that was lighting up wasn't the logic and reasoning center. It was the part associated with fear, threat, even disgust.
Wow. So our brains are basically reacting like they're being physically attacked, just because someone disagrees with our opinions.
It's kind of wild, right? It's like our brains see it as a threat to our identity. And that's why it's so hard to change our minds sometimes, even when we see evidence that contradicts what we believe.
Yeah.
We're literally wired to defend our beliefs.
It reminds me of that Robert Frost poem, Mending Wall, where the speaker is like, why do we even need this wall between our properties?
And the neighbor just keeps saying, good fences make good neighbors. No real explanation, just clinging to that belief.
Right. It's like those beliefs can become our own mental walls, keeping us stuck even when things aren't working. So how do we break down those walls? How do we become more open to challenging those ingrained beliefs?
The book has this simple but powerful exercise. Think of a few core beliefs you have about yourself and try to figure out where they came from.
So like if you always tell yourself, I'm not a creative person, you'd try to remember when you first started believing that. Was it something a teacher said? Or maybe a pattern in your family?
Exactly. And then here's the important part. Ask yourself, is this belief still true? Is it helping me live a better life, or is it actually limiting me?
We have to be willing to let go of those outdated beliefs. It's like we're giving our minds a software update.
I like that. And as we start breaking down those internal walls, we also start to loosen the grip of FOPO. Because when we're confident in who we are and what we believe, other people's judgments just don't have as much power over us.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. The first rule of mastery really lives up to its name. It gives you practical advice on how to deal with that fear of judgment and start living a more authentic and fulfilling life.
I totally agree. If there's one thing I want listeners to remember, it's that you are worthy. Regardless of what anyone else thinks, your worth comes from within.
So let's ditch those limiting beliefs that are holding us back. What amazing things could we accomplish if we gave ourselves permission to let go of those old stories? The possibilities really are endless.